Hey everybody, how y'all doing tonight? Ben has posted an attendance thread in the Slack forum. So go ahead and respond to that, and we'll get started in a few minutes. Hey everybody, welcome to class. If you haven't popped your name or your response in the attendance thread, go ahead and take a second to do that. In the meantime, it looks like most everybody's here. So what we're going to be doing today is continuing on with our lesson in lab from yesterday. So, just as a brief recap, what we've been doing is we're trying to connect Express, which serves our data, and Mongoose, which stores our data in a MongoDB. And what I wanted to do is launch class with just kind of like a review of what we've been doing, and like we can code together the first step of the lab, which was making a controller. And then y'all are going to have till about like 7-ish to finish it, and we'll come back and review it.
Cool.
Did I hear someone with a question? Okay, so here we are at my desktop. I am in my home folder in my terminal. So I'm going to cd into my SEI folder, and then I'm going to cd into trainings with a T and an R, yeah. And then, so our lesson from yesterday was called Express API CRUD.
Oh shit.
I'm just hanging here for a second so y'all can catch up. Okay. So I'm going to open this up in VS Code. Oh no, I typed open dot. When you do open, it does Finder. I typed the word I was saying, typing and talking, Okay, there we go, code, sorry. Okay, so here we are. This is our Express app. What we were doing is we were writing some Express routes and connecting it with Mongoose. What we had was our book model. So here we are going to create a books API, and we're going to create one of every basic CRUD route. Create, read, update, destroy in all of our Express routes. We also had this test DB.js that we were going to use, or we could use to write some Mongoose queries, some database queries, before we connected it with our Express routes, which I always think is a great idea, just to kind of separate the two from having bugs and stuff. So what I wanted to do to kick off our lab was to first, well, let's just go over the lab instructions real quick, and then I'll pause for questions. So the step one was to create a controller and move all of the book routes into it. So we wrote one route together, the post, but we're going to need to create all of these pseudo-coded routes. And we already have this controllers folder with nothing in it. So that would be step one. And then step two was optionally writing some Mongoose queries just for some extra practice, and then finishing the express routes. And I was yesterday suggesting you could write a query and then connect it to your express route one by one. Any questions so far? Okay, so raise your hand if you were able to refactor to a controller yesterday. Well, it looks like some of us, but not all of us. Cool. Chad.
No question. I was just raising my hand.
Oh, cool. Okay, so remember a controller. I got this question from quite a few people. What is a controller? So I'm going to type in MVC, MDN, because I love acronyms. Wait, no, this isn't the one I wanted. I literally just sent this to someone too. Model view controller MDN. I'm like so sad I can't find the link I want. I'm going to find it on Slack real quick. Give me 1 second. Okay, here we go. And I can Slack this out. So this is the NVC, what they refer to as a design pattern. So I'll put this in the code channel. There you go. So y'all can look at it too. So the model view controller is just a way of designing software. It's called the design pattern. And when a user needs to have an interface, which is like 90% of software. I mean, there's like very little software that doesn't have user interaction, right? When you have a user interaction, you use this model view controller design pattern. So the model is what manages the data. The view is what the user sees, and the controller routes commands from the model, from the view to the model. So it lets the user interact with the data. It's just a way of writing software, and like most software is designed this way. It's just important to know. It's the kind of question you might get as like a junior in a dev interview. Okay, so we need to make this controller. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch a file. We already have this controllers folder. I'm going to organize it into my controllers folder. You could call this folder whatever you want. You could call it like routes. You could call it anything, but we called it controllers just to illustrate the design pattern. And I'm going to just make books.js. Okay, so I'm gonna press enter. And I now have books.js. So here, what I need to do is I need to make an express router. Step one is to make an express router. Step two is to mount some routes on it. And step three is to export it. So to make a controller, we need to, in Express, we need to make an express router, mount, then we need to mount express routes on the router, and then we need to export the router. Those are the 3 steps. And then we'll have to require it over here too. That's also a step. Okay, so to make an express router, we need to require express, just like we did in our server, to make the app. So just like up here, to make our app, we need to require express, but rather than making an app, we're going to make an express router. So I'm going to say const express equals require express. And this is kind of similar to how we make the app. I'm going to say const router equals express. And rather than invoking it to make the app like we do in the server, we say dot capital router. Capital is super important because it won't work otherwise. And you invoke it. Now I always forget to export my router. I like mount all my routes on it and then I don't export it and I wonder why my thing's broken. So I just do this step next is I say module dot exports equals router. Okay. So what I want to do is the way this is organized is everything relating to the books model is going to be managed by the books controller. It's how we get interactions from the user to the model. So I'm not going to copy the, the test hello world route. And I'm scrolling down the bottom. I'm not going to copy any of my error handling middleware, but I am going to copy everything related to books, even the lab instructions, because the lab will mostly take place over there now. So I'm going to copy all of this, and this is what goes into my controller. It's organized so that, actually, I'll leave that there. It's organized so that this is everything that allows the user to interact with the books. So I'm going to command V it, and then I've got to make sure to not do that. I have to make sure to delete all this stuff. I don't want, this is a really important step. If I in my server have like another route that's like / books, it'll cause a problem. Wally.
Hey, my bad. Which parts did you take out from the server.js and you put into the routers?
So I took out my post route and then all of the pseudocode for the other lab routes, the CRUD routes, along with the lab instructions. So pretty much.
Oh, that's it. Just
if I close this. Right.
None of the middlware. Right, you left the middleware alone, right?
Yeah. So the middleware stays here because it's applicable to all routes. Like, let's say we had another model. We had users. Like, let's say we were making a Goodreads clone, and a user could like give a rating to a book and a favorite a certain book. Well, a user model would have a separate controller, but both the user and the books would rely on the error handling middleware. So the stuff that's in server.js like is kind of used by everyone.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And we have some extra junk in the trunk over here because we were like, kind of experimenting and building some stuff, but we wouldn't even necessarily need these here. But we can keep them in. Cool. Okay, so my one final step is I have to tell the server. I have two final steps. Sorry, we have one more thing we need to do in the books.js. I was about to make a bug. So because we required this router, we're going to mount all routes on the router. Rather than mounting on the app, we're going to mount them on the router. So up here, we create a router, we mount some routes on it, and then we export it over here. So the routes are kind of in this folder, and we can import the router over here and use them. So I just mounted my post route on the router. I'm just going to make a controller section. And to make a controller, I just have to say app.use, and then I have to require this file. If I want to put like a / in front of it, I can do that too. So like if I take this books out, for example, right here, I can tell it books over here. And then I can require dot forward slash the folder where your routes live. So in our case, it's controllers forward slash books. And by removing the URL here, I can just have a uniform URL put in front of everyone, because I know all my routes are going to need forward slash books, right? I know every route, it's going to be get books, post books, you know, books at a particular ID. So they're all going to use books. Hisham.
So when we're getting it by ID, then we don't need to, like you just said, we don't need to define books there. We can just leave it at :ID.
It would just be like this. Yeah.
Okay.
It would like literally be a string of forward slash :ID.
That's
And
okay.
Yeah, that's how
I
we
was
did it.
messing up yesterday. I was like, it wasn't working at all.
If you don't
Right,
want to
that's
put if you don't want to put it there, you can also remove that, and the controller will still work. It'll just not put anything in front of them.
Gotcha.
You just have to
Thank
keep it consistent one way or the other.
Yeah, I think this looks cooler.
Yeah, you have to type books fewer times.
Yeah. Thank
Kevin.
Hey, can you scroll up on the server JS real quick? I just want to see about everything you got.
Oh, yeah.
You
You want to see what?
I just want to see like what you commented out and what you.
Oh, right here. So this is everything that we refactored into our connect function, just as an example of how to refactor that and use it several places.
Okay. Can you go up a little bit more? Just all the way
Oh,
up?
yeah.
Sure. All right. Cool. I think that's enough. Thank you.
Now this should still work. So if I run NodeMon, Express is happy, and I should still be able to post to /books. So this should still work, the route we created together. What did it do? Book is not defined. Oh, I made a bug. What bug did I make? Somebody help me out. I'm so glad I did this, because this is like, I'm sure everyone else did this too. What it says, it's saying book is not defined in controllers book.js line 25. So right here, it's saying this book is not defined, capital B. What did I do wrong? Hisham?
You didn't require it on the top.
Yes, so when I cut everything out, but I didn't move this over too. So we don't need book in our server anymore. We don't need to require the database model. So I can copy that over here. And I'm just going to say also require DB if you need it, lol, because that's another step. So now this book is it. So this book on line 28 now is going to refer to our database model. So everybody needs to do that step. Alex.
Can you go back to the controller, like where you created the controller in server.js? I need to type this in.
Sammy, do you have a question?
Yeah, was it just to make sure? So in our server.js for in line 36, when you have app.use and the books path, so say in our project we would have movies, for example, so we would also have to add like this, which require the controller, right? We would have to do it for each.
So for the homework, I would definitely suggest requiring a controller for movies, because you're going to need one for movies, and then as the assignment progresses, movies are going to get a rating. So you're going to have a ratings controller for that database model too. I'd put every database model of those routes into a controller. So yeah,
Okay,
I would definitely suggest that.
And you do have to require it, but individually you can't like group all of them together and require all the controllers.
You do have to do them individually, yeah.
Okay. All right, makes sense. Thank you.
There might be a way to do it, but it would be kind of like extra code, not part of Express. Express needs you to do them like this.
Okay, thank you.
Alex, did you still have a question or?
Yeah, after you created your controller, or defined it in server.js, what was the next step after that?
I also copied over my my requirement of the book model. And
Mhm.
so this post route relies on it. So we need to copy it to our over here. We just need to copy this from the server to your controller too. That's the last step. And then it should work.
Into controller.
Into your books controller. Oh, and my server's not. You have to make your. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry. I'm making all kinds of bugs. You have to dot. So actually, maybe it's good I'm demoing all these bugs. So when I try and hit it now, it says cannot find that module because I have to dot. So I need to back out of the folder one time because we are in over here in books.js. So we need to back out one / models / book.
Const book equals require models - book.
Yeah, you need two. Oh, I'm sorry. You need 2 dots in front of it because you have to back out of the controllers folder. And my postman's super small. There we go. And we created Dracula. Nice. So that's a refactoring to a controller. Wally?
So when we're on our server.js, we don't need to over here, we don't need to require the router over here anymore. We just do it at the bottom, right? At the app dot something.
Oh, yeah. This is it. You don't need to require the router. Express uses the router.
Okay. All right. So if you have it here in the app.use right there where you're requiring this, well, I guess that's the controller. If you're requiring if you're getting the controller on line 49, you don't need to require it up there then.
Yeah, you don't need to require it because if Express gets a router as middleware, it's like, oh, I got a router. I'm just going to add all these routes.
Would it be possible if we did, let's say if we did require it, we just passed in the variable, that'd be fine too?
No, that wouldn't work. We have to mount stuff on the router and then because we
Okay.
like you could require the router here and do like router.get somewhere, but you can also just mount them on apps. That would be pointless, kind of.
Thank you.
Alex, is that a stale hand or?
So should we be testing or sending anything from Postman right now?
Oh yeah, there's that route we wrote. There's the Postman request we wrote yesterday. Just go ahead and send that and it should work. Like here, I've probably created like 5 Draculas in my database. I have a database of nothing but Draculas.
Okay, and is this the one where we go into body and then raw?
If you saved it, did you save it with us yesterday? Because you should have it. Did you save it?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, you can just open your collection and go back to where you saved it. Okay. And like here, it shows the little dot next to body. That means that I have a body. Was that helpful?
I'm still getting a bug. It says module not found.
Which module is not found? Like here, if I have that error, yeah, let me make that happen. If I scroll to the top, what module is it saying it can't find?
Hold on, let me find it. Cannot find module /controllers.books.
Okay, so there's a problem with here, the app.use where you require the controller or the name of your JS file. Like mine will say that. If you post in the thread, if you post this part of your server JS and your folder structure, we'll be able to help you.
Okay.
So what do y'all think of this? So we're gonna have the lab probably to like around 7:15ish, and then we'll come back and go over it. So I'll have a bit of time for the lab. Do you want to write a database query together? Like, because what you have to do is you have to write a database query and put it into an express route. Do you want to do one together before we break into lab? Or do you just want to go straight into it? Give me a thumbs up for do one together. Okay, say about 50%. This is a democracy. Let's do it. Okay, so I'm over here in testdb.js. So this is what I'm going to do. So I have to write these express routes, right, which directly correspond to my CRUD actions. If I'm going to get a GET request /books, and I'm going to need to read all the books, right? So let's write that database query together. I'm going to update this read all. Let's just say read all books. Oops. Whoa. Oh, I think I made an example bug and I didn't fix it. There we go. Sorry. Okay, example bug fixed. So if we need to read all of our books and we've already required our book model, who can help me out? What can I do with Mongoose in order to read all the books? Austin?
You can get books.
Well, I can use my book model, and it has a method inside of it. Oh no, it's just telling me what it is when I made the dot. So I can say book dot.
Find.
Find, yes, I can say book dot find, and I can give it an empty object or just nothing. And this is going to return a promise. So I had a question about this. So database queries, they take a little bit of time. So database queries take a little time. And because they take a little bit of time, it could be like 4 milliseconds, it could be 10 milliseconds. It might be a huge query. It could take, a minute or something. So they return a promise because they take some time. They take longer than just instantly. Code goes like instant, right? So they take longer than instantly. And so they return a promise, and that's why we can use dot then. Oops, there we go. Does that make sense? Okay, so I can say dot then. I'm honestly just going to console log all of them. But in Express, you'll have to do something different. In Express, you will need to respond with some JSON. I'm going to close this. So we're just doing a test query here. And in Express, we need to respond some JSON, but we're just going to console log it just to double check that everything's working. And then .catch, I'll also just console log that, but likewise, I want to console.log it. But likewise, in Express, you want to pass the error to our error handler that we wrote. So there will be some differences when you go to put this inside of an Express app, but you could honestly just copy paste it and then update the code. Okay, so I'm going to comment out all of this book create, because if I run this file, it's going to just keep creating like a bajillion Shia LaBeouf books. And so I just controlled C my server if yours is running. So I commented out my create a book stuff because I don't want any of that to run. And using Node, I'm just going to run testdb.js. Because all I want to do, so what I'm expecting you to see is all of the books I've created in my database, which is going to be like 5 Draculas and 5 Shia LaBeouf books. And that's what I'm expecting to see in my terminal. Okay, I'm going to give it a shot. Yes. So I have many books. These are all the books. Oh, there's only 3. That's less than I expected. So here we're just testing our database, and then we're going to connect it to our Express app so that it can be, requested over HTTP. Questions before we jump into lab? Do y'all feel like you have a clear sense moving forward about what to work on with the lab? Wally?
Yeah, this is kind of like a question, not really about the lab, but more about like just Mongoose in general. Is that cool?
Yeah, that's cool.
So with models, I just want to like double check this because I was trying to do like review some today, but in the models folder, like where we have our books, JS, that's where our schema is going to go, right? Or like our kind of, that's where our constructor for where we're creating our books. Okay, cool. And okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
It's because the database is the data that's being interacted with. So it's sort of all of our database stuff goes in the models folder. And you might have like a production app. It might have like a dozen or more models. It can have a lot, like think about like you could have a comment, you could have like replies. If it's like social media, you could have like a tweet, you could have a reply. You have so many different things. Reactions to post, that would be another model. So it would all go in the models folder.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna open up labs. I'm gonna open up breakout rooms, and I have created them wrong. I'm gonna open up breakout rooms, and we'll probably work on this maybe to about 7-ish. Take a break, and then come back and do it together. Sound good? All right, breakouts are open. Hey everybody, let's start coming back from break so we can review this lab. How y'all feeling about Express post lab? Give me a fist to 5. Fist being like, I hate Express. I don't know what's happening at all. 5 being like, I think I'm getting this. Misha, what's up?
I feel like I know you want to like fist 5, but like I feel like I need more examples with like connecting to like Mongoose. Like I get it, but it's just that if we had like more labs too, that would work too, or more examples, not necessarily labs, but like homework.
No, totally. I feel that. So we do have the DIY API homework, which is going to be literally like a not quite a copy pasta of this, but it's going to be redoing everything we've done with movies. But also the good news is we're going to be using Express for this unit and the next unit. We're going to be seeing a lot of Express. So if you're feeling like you're starting to get comfortable, but you need some more work, well, you've come to the right place, because we're going to be doing a lot of Express and Mongoose. But honestly, just I guess I got my experience with Express just from spinning up backends like over and over again. Yeah, sorry, I know that wasn't probably the best answer to that question. Well, raise your hand. It's okay if you weren't able to finish this lab, or like if you had like a route or two left, that's okay. But who was able to finish the lab? Was anyone able to finish? Oh, cool, some of y'all, nice job. Did anyone not be able to finish? Okay, a few people too. All right, that's cool. We're going to go over it ourselves, and then we're basically going to be replicating this pattern in the next lecture, and also for the homework. Okay, so here we kind of went over the Mongoose part of this together, but well, who can help me out here? What do I have to do to plug in the Mongoose that we wrote together to a route in Express? What do I have to do here? Wally?
My bad. We're gonna do router.get.
Mm-hmm. Router.get, because we're listening for a get request to come in, and we're inside of a files with a router. So router.get /. So we need to listen for requests coming in. We're going to send a response out, and we're going to use next for our error handling. And this will be our callback. So here now it's just kind of like plug and play. We've already required our book model. So we just need to find all. When we .then off of our promise, so we're going to find a variety of books. So I'm going to call this books, and we can just res.json those books back. I'm going to indent this one time. And so just like our route below, where we're using next to pass on errors down to chain, we can do that here. Easy peasy. Just for the sake of brevity, I'm not going to write testers for every single one of these. But I would like to test this route with Postman. Whoa. So I'm going to make a new request to localhost 3001 /books.
Hey, Weston.
Oh, what's up?
Actually, I'll bother you. I'll ask you a question later when we get to the next one.
Okay, that's cool. Nice. There's my API that just serves up Shia LaBeouf books and Dracula. Was everybody able to get this far in the lab? I hope so. In the second part of our lab. Do y'all have any questions about the process of, kind of factoring from vanilla Mongoose, so to speak, to getting it into an Express route? Chad, what's up?
Yeah, would we want to put the status code on each one of these?
So the default status code, like here in Postman, it's going to show me the status code 200. That's an
Okay.
okay. That's the default status code for Express.
Okay.
I feel like that's okay for this situation.
Mhm.
We used 201 here because we had created something and it's like a more specific good message, like, hey, something good happened and we created something.
Mhm.
So if it's just like a normal okay message, I'll just use the default.
Okay, I didn't realize the default was 200. That makes it a
Mhm.
lot easier. Thank you.
Yeah, so 200's the default if 200's the default if everything goes okay in the route. If Express can't find it, the default's 404. And if an error is thrown in one of the routes, like we did in our example error route, if an error is thrown in one of the routes, then it's default to 500. So those are like the three main defaults that you'll encounter. Sammy.
Yes, I just want to try to understand. So when in our books.js file in online 29, when we are plugging basically our router with just a /, but then when we do our HTTP request in Postman, we have /books. So does this mean that the router.post online 29, it's just a / because it applies to all of
So
our
it's because we put this right here in our server when we required it. It's also possible to do it this way. So if you give it like a value here, it'll put it in front of everything, you know, in the other file. If I remove that, you would have to put it here.
Oh, I see. Okay, that's what
Yeah.
I was saying. Okay.
Oh, that not right there. I'm sorry, that's the wrong file. You'd have to put it right. I closed the file I wanted.
Image.
We'd put it, yeah,
Each
yeah.
model.
Mhm. In each route. So /. So it's kind of like one or the other.
Got it. Okay. So when we require it, we already
Yeah, you can choose
putting
to.
it. Okay. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Like I could just leave it like this and we could keep going. And so if I go over to Postman, my expectation is that it's going to work exactly the same. Oh, it does.
Great.
So
Thank you.
I can just leave it like this. This is fine.
Thanks.
Alex, what's up?
Can you go over the Postman section again? How to
Oh
do the
yeah,
send?
it's just like literally a new. So I'll just delete this. So I just clicked the plus button right here.
Mhm.
So I just created a new one and I just typed in localhost 3000 / books. So it's just a regular GET request. So we're just saying, hey, can you retrieve some information for us?
3001 /books.
Or whatever port your server is running on.
Is it a get or a post?
It is a GET. So all we're doing here is just asking to display all of the books that are in the database. So a GET requests asks for as a read without any kind of creation or anything. If we change this to post, right here, what's going to happen is we have a post defined on line 29. It's going to wind up here in this route if we change that to post. So when we get that, I know this is a bit confusing, like, but you can have the same URL pattern with different HTTP methods on it. So we can get / books and also post / books.
So when I do localhost 3000 books with a get, it says econ refused. That's the error that I get.
Is it because your server isn't running? If my server is not running, it says econ refused. So make sure, is your server running?
Yeah. Let's see. It just says module not found.
Okay, you have an error somewhere in your code. What module is it saying you aren't finding?
Cannot find quotes / controllers .books.
Did you post in the thread?
Not yet. Let me post, or I did earlier. Let me post it again.
Can you go ahead and post your oh, you did earlier? That sounds like the same error you had before.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you post your file structure and also your where you use the controller. Yeah, post that.
Okay, it's posted.
Cool. Oh, it is? Cool. Let me look at Slack. Slack is on my other computer. Okay, you have this in your code. You have controllers.books, Alex, and it should be /books.
That's on the server JS.
Yeah, so you have this, and it should be that. Okay, doke. Did you find it?
Yeah.
Nice.
Okay, so let me try the send again.
Oh, right. And make sure it's running. Oh, yeah.
So it's sending holes by Shia LaBeouf. Were we supposed to create a different book?
Optional, totally optional. I mean, if you were following along, you would have. Okay, so that means it's working, Alex.
Okay.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can post a new book if you want. It's kind of, it's like optional. Okay, so we did the post together. Let's stub out these routes. So one thing I'm doing, like if I'm building an API, I will just write route stubs. Or no, let's do them one by one. It'll be easier. So here, what we want to do is we want to get, Wally, what's up?
My bad. So literally all we're doing is just wrapping our express CRUD, I guess, what would you call it? Your CRUD methods around the MongoDB methods.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah. All right, cool. Thanks.
Okay, so I took out, just because Sammy asked that question, I took out my route here. So I'm just going to do /books /:ID. But if you have the route there in your server, you'll need to just do this, FYI, which is like everyone. Okay, so need the request, response, and next for our error handling. And there is our route. So this :ID is going to be a particular book that we want to look up. So that's going to be a books ID. And remember, in Express, it comes in on the Express calls them the request parameters, and those are the variables in the URL. So I'm just going to pull it out of there, and I'm going to call it the book ID equals I'm sorry, what am I doing? Equals the request dot params dot ID. And so if I send, books / a big long ID or anything, it's going to be stored here. Okay, so we can use the find by ID method. So this is a mongoose method, and it allows us to find by ID, and we can give it the book ID. So once we found it by ID, we can, I'm just going to call it a book singular because it's going to be one book, and this will be an arrow function. Oops. This will be an arrow function, and I will res.json book. So we'll give it a book key. The trick is what we'll have to do is we'll have to find an existing book and send it in. And then .catch, we'll just pass it on down the line. Okay, let's test it out. I'm gonna save my file. So in Postman, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna save this real quick. Save it real quick. So I'm gonna close all these out and let's make a new request. The cool thing about Postman and Express is we can use the ID syntax in both of them, the :ID syntax. So localhost 3001 /books/:ID. And when I put the colon in, it automatically picks up like the fact that I've put in a parameter. Oh, we need another request. Oh, shoot. Is it okay if I make Postman big? Are y'all done with this? Okay, cool. I'm gonna make Postman big. So this is how this is gonna work. We're gonna have to get an ID that exists in our database. Usually this would be like in our HTML or something, but I'm gonna come over to my saved get all books. So if I get all books, you can see I have access to these IDs, and you can actually stick these in the URL. So I'm going to copy this from my get / and paste it in here. Again, I had to get all books and paste an ID. It doesn't matter which one. Everyone's is going to be different. Cool. And it finds that one for me. Hisham.
See, I did it a different. I mean, we did it a different way.
Yeah.
Like we just threw the ID straight into the get there instead of doing that. So
That's fine. That works
Decided
too.
it's the same thing then.
Yeah.
Right.
I was just trying to show off all the fancy features of Postman. Yeah,
Oh,
this is
okay.
perfectly fine.
Okay, I thought that's like a certain way we're supposed to do it.
No, I mean, like, this works, but you can also kind of put, if you do this, you get this little key value pair, and maybe it's a little easier to
Oh
edit.
yeah.
Maybe it's a little
So
easier to edit.
All right, cool. We're just trying to bootstrap it, so we don't know.
Yeah, that works too.
Thank you.
Mhm. Any questions about getting with the request parameters in there? Cool. Wally.
My bad. The request params ID. So I'm still a little bit like kind of confused about the request. That's like what we're putting in, right? That's like I guess that's like a
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what Postman sends a request over for us, or
Oh,
Google
cool.
Chrome does, or curl does.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Alex, you got a question?
Yeah, so localhost 3000 /books/ should it be :ID or the actual ID that we got in the previous post?
Whichever one you want. Both will work. You can do it like this, like what Hisham was saying, that'll work.
So when you hit send, it's supposed to return the book.
You should see a book that's sent back over. Yeah.
So I got it's like a HTML boilerplate.
What does it say?
So I did localhost 3000 /book/ and then an ID,
Mhm.
hit send, and then
What did the HTML say? Does it say cannot get?
yeah, cannot get /book/.
Do you have it like I do, or is yours like this? Yours should be like this, Alex. I just changed my code because Sammy asked a question. I should change it back. Does yours look like that? Just / ID in your route. Sammy asked a question. I updated my code, so.
Which one are you on?
The one you're on. Yours should look like this.
Okay, on the
Get /books :ID.
okay. Mine's router.get /book/ :ID.
Yours should look like this.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll work after that. Sammy asked a question about how the URL worked, so I had changed my code. Okay. So let's put. So put's like a combination of our get and our post. We're going to be replacing an entire thing in our database, but it already exists. So we need the ID, and we also need the request body. So I'm going to route.put, and this will be a :ID. So one particular ID, request, response, and the next. There we go. Okay, so what we'll do here is I'll say const book ID, just like we did above, equals the rec.params.id. So we're going to have the ID in the request parameters. And here what I want to do is I want to find a book by its ID, and then I want to update it. So just like last time, book.find by ID. And that'll be the book ID. But we're also going to want to have some book data that we can update in here. So we just don't want to like send back a book like we did before until we've updated it. So that's going to come through in the request body, like on our post route. So I'm just going to call this the book data is going to be the request .params.book. We'll call it book, just like we did in our post. So now once we find one by ID, we can update it with our book data. So here in our .then, we're going to need two .then. So we'll .then, when we find the book, we will update it, and we're just going to return it. So book.update 1 with our book data that we got from the request body. And so update one's going to give us the book back, and it's going to need a promise. That's why I have to dot that again. So we're chaining a promise here. And we'll get the book once it's updated, and we'll res.json the book. So it's just an extra step. Austin.
Yeah, so the body, the book body comes from the parameters, doesn't come from the body of the request.
Oh my goodness, I made a typo. Thank you for catching that.
Okay,
Y'all
yeah,
are on
no
board
worries.
on top of this. Yeah. So sending the data in the request body. Nice. That was a test, and you passed it, Austin.
Ah, thanks. I needed that gold star.
And here, because we're good developers, we handle our errors. Oh my goodness, I keep doing this. Dot catch next. So we'll just kick on any errors down the line. Okay, so let's test it. Goodbye server. Save that. So we're gonna need a request similar to this get. I've made a similar to this get, but it's going to be similar to our post because it's going to have a request body. So yeah, I want to save this in there. Cool. So I'm just going to grab this ID already. And let's make a new put request. So localhost :3001 /books/ the book ID. And this is going to be a put. So update the whole thing. So this takes care of the rec.param so we can find the book. But then when we want to update it, I'm going to head over to the body tab. I'm going to make it bigger so it behaves like how I'm familiar with. And we want to select raw because we're sending over raw JSON, and we have to select the JSON, the type dropdown right here. So this is going to look just like our post. We're going to give a book and it needs quotes around it because it's JSON, not a nook, but a book. So we have a title and an author, right? So our title is going to be, I'm so out of book ideas. Somebody give me a book.
Holes 3.
Did you say holes 3? Did I hear that right? Okay. And this is, of course, written by Shia LaBeouf. Lee Buff. So make sure to put everything in quotes, and this comma is really important right here. I was actually expecting to see the whole book. Sad. I was hoping that this would send us to actually see where the book was. We can update the code. This is actually, I mean, this is like a fine response. We could also redirect to the books ID like we were doing the other day. I'm gonna leave it as this so we can do delete. Or on delete, we need to redirect to. Yeah, let's do delete and that'll have the redirect. Just so we get through them all. Sound good? Okay. Hisham.
I was gonna say with the way that you have it, actually, never mind. I did have redirect. Never mind.
Yeah, you could also redirect right
Yeah,
here.
I was gonna say that it showed me the book, but I thought, never mind.
Yeah, that's
Sorry.
cool. We could redirect to a backtick. Actually, we would have to refactor how this works, so never mind. We'll do this on the delete, the other way of doing it. Okay, we'll just do it here, what Hisham was talking about. So we'll do a router dot delete /:ID. So just like the last three, this should be pretty familiar by now. We need the request, the response, and the next. So here we don't need any data because we're not updating anything. We're not creating anything. We're just going to be destroying something. So we're going to get the ID from the request parameters. So const ID equals rec.params.id. And then we can do book dot find by ID. Or no, let's keep this consistent with what I did before. Book ID. That's more consistent. And this should be book ID. Hisham, did you have another question?
No, my bad.
You good? Okay, so we can just do dot then. Once we find the book, we'll just do book dot delete one. And I just opened up curly boys because we're gonna do the redirect technique. So we'll do book dot delete one. So that'll delete the book, and then we can redirect. And there's actually a status. I forget, someone was asking about statuses earlier, what we can do. So CTP status codes. There is a successful response that actually makes sense here. No content. So we could send no content back and then a redirect. And so what we'd be saying is there's no content here. We're redirecting you to where there is some content. So res.status 204, because we just deleted something successfully. Redirect backticks /books /:. No, I'm sorry. This is where we interpolate the string to the book.id. And there should be 204. That was a typo. No, 204. So we send a status of nothing to be found here, and then we redirect them to where something can be found. Actually, no, it should just be /books. I'm making this so complicated. There we go. So we say there's no content here. Here's the list of all the books. That's what we should do. And this can be a regular string. Nice. Okay, then we also have to handle our error, if there is one. So we can dot catch next. And you could do it a similar scheme to this. You could redirect up here. That would be okay too. That would be acceptable as well. Wally?
So for the delete one over here, since we're using the, I guess the return data, we don't have to pass anything in there.
Yeah, there's nothing, there's no content. We could honestly just send like a 204, like there's no content here. It's gone. Oh, wait, are you talking about line 68?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the book that was found. So
Okay.
the book that was found, and then you just say delete. They have these methods inside the found books, inside the instances of the models, and we can just find it and then delete it. I think there's also a find by ID and delete mongoose method too. So there's a couple ways to achieve this.
All right, cool.
Mhm.
If we did like just books, capitalized books, dot delete one, and we just passed in the ID.
Yeah, that would work. Yeah, I guess I made this way more complicated than I had to.
No, not at all. That's fine.
Or is it a different method? I'm actually kind of blanking right now. I'd have to look it up. But yeah, this should work for us too.
Thank you.
Sammy?
Sorry, Wes, I know we've been using this for a while, but could you just explain again the dot catch next? We're passing next as a parameter to
check this out. So this is really cool. Like when you have so catch only happens when there's an error. So this is an error. And what happens inside of the catch, so it's going to say next, and then just like we did when we did the example error, where is it? Right here, when we threw an error and that caused Express to have an error. So it says next throw new error. That's what it does, like inside of the catch when we give it the next. And so then, and it would be like throw new error capital, and it would like invoke it. And so then what happens is, because it's in because we gave it a dot then, it's like, oh snap, or I'm sorry, because we gave it in the next, it's like, because sorry, words, I'm gonna say it right. Because we gave it next, what next does is it sends the error over here. So all of these nexts all wind up here because they have an error in them. And so this is our special error handling middleware over here.
Because what's confusing me though is that in the middleware of the next is you see how it's like grayed out, so it's not even used in the middleware. So I'm just confused.
Oh, here we're not using it because there is no next. This is the end of the line. You get here, the only thing that's happened is an error. It's the very last stop on the line.
Oh, okay. So the over next, they're redirecting to that app.use, and that's the middleware for next.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, the next sends you down here. This one has no next. I mean, there's no next after
something,
the error.
Yeah. That would be a next of a next. Okay.
Yeah, it would be a next of a next. You're right.
Okay, got it. And then, so we don't have to actually define the next keyword. It's just part of Express, right?
It's just part of Express. And Express is open source. You can go look at the source code if you want. But yeah, it's just how they wrote it.
Got it. All right. That's helpful. Thank you.
Misha, you had a question?
So in the server.js, just to clarify what you just told Sammy for under the 500 error. So because it's middleware, we have to put next, right?
Yeah, so next, so whether it's a middleware or it's a route, what next does is it sends it to the next thing in the line. Express goes from top to bottom. Whatever we do, I'm going to delete these. Whatever we ever, I want my cursor back. Whenever we define first, happens first. This is the very first thing that happens in our app because it's on top. And then next we have the body parsing middleware happen. So requests run through all of these. And next is what sends it to the next thing. When we have a response, there's no next. It's like kind of like a return. It ends right there. And so next just sends it to the next thing. Like here, we log the request method and the request URL, and then we go to the next thing.
It's like a callback, or
it is exactly like a callback because it is a callback.
Okay.
Yes, next is a callback. Yeah. So I'm sorry, Misha, I forgot what was your question? Did I answer your question?
No, you did. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Kevin.
Hey, I just want to make sure of that I'm following this correct. So like when you put like the like on put, you put like then booked and then arrow sign to like res JSON. You put that because like in Postman, you want it to read the JSON, right? Is that
Yes, exactly. Yeah. We can send over other types of data to Express. It can handle all types. We're just specifically using JSON in class.
Yeah, but and that's because we're using Postman with this, right?
Because we're using Postman, but also like, do you remember the Ajax that we did with jQuery? That was JSON as well.
Okay,
So we're
sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
And like the rec, res, next, that's just like arrow handling, right?
So the request is what comes in from Postman or wherever. Like it could be a curl script, it could be jQuery. The response is what we send out, and next is an internal callback function in Express that allows us to get to the next thing in line.
Okay, so request would be like if you put like books ID, they want you to put an ID, and that's a response, right? And then the next would just be like afterwards.
Next would be there is no response, so we have to keep going.
Okay. Cool. Thanks.
Yep. Okay, so that's all, folks. But I'm gonna push up and I'm gonna push up this code and hand it over to Ben.
Hey y'all, we haven't exactly been going for an hour, but I do think we're at a good spot for a break just before my lesson starts up. Let's go ahead, we'll come back at 8:04 p.m. and then we'll go ahead and get started with our next lesson. So back at 8:04 p.m. Okay, it's 8:04 p.m. Let's go ahead and come back together, everyone. Over in the forum channel, I've gone ahead and slacked out our next repo. If y'all wouldn't mind going ahead, opening it up, going through your preparation instructions. Let me go ahead and share my screen for y'all. Preparation instructions are going to be kind of similar to a lot of the other lessons you've seen so far. One caveat I want to mention for y'all just before y'all get too far into the preparation instructions. For this lesson, it's going to have a restaurants API folder, kind of similar to how y'all were working inside of a books folder with Weston. So do make sure that you CD into this folder first. Otherwise, if you just do an npm install up at the top, it's not going to do anything. So going to give folks a good 2 minutes or so, finish up the preparation instructions, make sure you CD into that restaurants API folder. I'll give another minute or so for folks to finish up. Okay, hopefully we're all finishing up about now. Now, for today's lesson, we're going to be learning a little bit more about Express. So the previous lesson, we got to go ahead and see, okay, how could we use Express and Mongoose to go ahead and CRUD on a resource? In your case, you'll ended up CRUDing on books, creating them, reading them, updating, destroying, what have you. In this lesson, realistically, I'm not going to teach y'all all that much of new content. This is really mostly kind of like the Mongoose relationships lesson y'all already had, but saying, okay, how do we do that same kind of concept we saw back with Mongoose relationships now that we have Express? How does it change once we have Express introduced? So we're really going to be not really getting into too much new territory, mostly going to be like a combination of two things we've seen so far. With that said, let's go ahead and talk about our objectives for today before we get too far into it. The objectives for today's lesson is we are going to use Express to CRUD on a Mongoose subdocument. So we CRUDed on a Mongoose subdocument before. Now we're using Express for that. And we'll also use Express to CRUD on a Mongoose reference. So we got to see that there were two different ways we could create relationships, the subdocument arrays, or you could also have a single subdocument, or using references. And we'll see both of those approaches today. Now, before we go too far into this, I do think it would be nice to maybe spend some time looking over the code that's inside of this lesson. And for the most part, it's going to be kind of a review over what Weston's been showing you off the last few lessons. There are a couple of changes, like different folder names or some different updates to the error handling, which we'll go into. But for the most part, it should look pretty similar. Let's go ahead and start this off by just making sure to start up our application. If y'all still have the application running from the last lesson, kill it. You can only have one running at a time, so go ahead, kill the application from the last lesson. And then for our server, we can go ahead and just start it up with an npm space run space server. And it should go ahead and just start up perfectly fine. Do make sure that you're in the restaurants API folder. Also make sure that you've already run your npm install inside of the restaurants API folder before you run your npm run server. If you're in the right folder, if you've already done your npm install, should go ahead, just start up. Now, let's go ahead and maybe just dive into some of the code to start this off with. And while I'm diving into the code, go ahead and if you all have any questions at any point, go ahead and add them over to the question thread. I'm going to go ahead and try to check that at the end of each file or so, just so that we're able to go ahead and constantly look at them. But if y'all have any questions, do let me know now. This is, a review session, so if there is anything that y'all are confused about or that's slightly different between the two, good time to ask about it. Now we're going to go ahead and just start off over inside of the server.js file because that's kind of our entry point to the application. We'll just see how it's written. The way that the server.js file is written goes ahead and starts off by requiring our libraries. We're working with both Express and Mongoose, so it makes sense to go ahead and require both of them. The next thing we're going to go ahead and see is going to be the middleware that y'all ended up writing with Weston. One way that this lesson actually goes ahead and changes it up is they actually put the error handling inside of its own files. Goes ahead and put the middle, sorry, not just the error handling, the middleware as well. So things like the request logger is inside of its own file. Let me go ahead and pull that up for you. We went ahead and organized it over inside of this lib folder, and it's inside of request_logger.js. Now, inside of here, the request logger might look a little bit different than the one that y'all did with Weston, but it's going to hit the same main points. It's going to go ahead and accept the rec, res, and next parameters because it's a middleware function. All middleware functions except rec, res, and next. You ever see rec, res, next? That's a middleware function. What y'all did with Weston was go ahead and log out the method and URL, I believe. Now, what we're going to go ahead and do inside of this lesson, and what y'all will have inside all the future lessons, is it's going to log a couple of other useful things. It's also going to go ahead and log the current time and date. If you go ahead and say new date parentheses, it's going to go ahead and give you back the new date and the current time. For example, if I go ahead and open up a new tab because my server is running in the first tab, and I type in node, I can just paste in new date, and it's going to tell me 20211111 and then some other time. So it looks like it's 4 p.m. or 4 a.m. 4 a.m. and 11 minutes inside of UTC, which is what they use. Like they don't go ahead and try to show your own time zone or anything. They want this to be like a universal time that anybody can recognize. So they use UTC, which is why it looks probably so weird. That's not any of our time zones. So that's what they're doing over there. They're going ahead and logging the current date and time as well. Now, another thing we wanted to log inside this file, another difference that y'all would see between the last lesson and this lesson, is that we also want to go ahead and log rec.body if it exists. For you're only going to have the body if it's like a post request and you're actually sending data or something like that, or I guess for an update request and you're sending data. So we won't always see the body if there isn't a body, but if there is a body, we're going to go ahead and log it. Log the request's body. May be empty for a get/delete request. The rest of it though should look pretty similar to what y'all did with Weston. Y'all still need to call next at the end. Now, another difference, since we went ahead and organized this a little bit, we brought it out over into its own file. We need to export it at the bottom. So export the request logger middleware function. And the reason we're doing that is so we can, and there are a lot of words that y'all will see for this, but so that we can use the request logger. Oh gosh, what the heck did I just do? Okay. It tries to autocomplete every so often, doesn't do a great job. Now, some other terms you could see as opposed to use is definitely just like the most human term there. Other terms you're going to see is mount. So you might hear it called mounting the middleware. What's another one? Mounting the middleware. I'm sure I'll mention it later. The other term's slipping my head right now, but you'll probably hear me say it a million times throughout this lesson. Oh, just register. Those are the other two big terms you're going to hear for it, is register and mount. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and check the question thread. If y'all have any questions about this logger so far, or how we're requiring it up top, let me know. We do get to see down on line 23, we are going to say app.useRequestLogger eventually. So that's like what y'all did with Weston, except with Weston, I think y'all just wrote it straight inside of here, or maybe you had it in a variable, but we're going to go ahead and import it from a different file instead. Let's look at those questions. Oh, only questions, how do we start our server? And looks like that's already been answered. Okay, if there aren't other questions about the request logger, I am going to move along. Same idea for the other files. If you have any questions as they come up, definitely add it over to thread them. Oh, Whale, you had a question?
Yeah, so this is like a general question. When we're doing our middleware, I forgot to ask this in the last lesson. Why are we putting it in the middle compared to like at the bottom if it's like error handling?
So I think we'll address that a little bit more later. The idea with middleware is it's going to be run in whatever order we're defining it in. So the one that matters, there's a couple of bits where the order matters. The things where the order matters the most is the error should happen last. Error handler should always be last, because you definitely want to make sure you handle that error. If you don't handle it last, like, oh, maybe you aren't going to handle it. So make sure the error handler is last. And that's an important one. Another thing to kind of have towards the top would be your logger. Well, just so you can see any request that comes in, definitely good to have that towards the top, so a request doesn't come in and you don't catch it. Same idea with this express.json call. That's another one you want to kind of keep at the top, so that if a request needs the data, it's already been added. But we'll get a little bit more into the ordering later. That's just kind of the short idea of what's important there. Error handler should always be last. Logger and going ahead and making sure your request has data on it. Typically good to have at the top, or else you're going to run into a bug whenever you need one of those.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, the next thing we have over here is going to be the error handler. I think we might go ahead and somewhat black box this for now. Well, let me go ahead and give you all a quick overview of what's inside of there and why we're black boxing this, but we'll come back to it in a bit. Actually, no. Let me prevent myself there. Let's completely black box it for now. We'll come back to it whenever I think it'll make a little bit more sense of the changes. But the idea here is we are importing both of these from two different files so that we can register them later. So import both. And then down here, we go ahead and register our middleware functions. Okay. So let's go ahead and we'll hand wave at error handler for now. We'll come back to it later. Let me even make a note in here to do. Come back to error handler. Okay. Other things that we're going to see inside of this file for now is we're going to go ahead and requiring some user routes for this file. We'll dig into the user routes after we've finished going through the rest of server.js, but the user routes are going to be similar to those book routes that you ended up writing. So y'all remember how you wrote a router for your books? The user routes is just a router for users instead. We'll dig into that in a bit. One thing I do want to mention here, one thing that's going to be different between this lesson and the future lessons and some of the stuff you've seen so far, is instead of going ahead and importing these from a controllers folder, this lesson and all the lessons you'll see coming up are going to use a routes folder. Now they're going ahead and using a routes folder because you go ahead and have routers inside of there. We could go ahead and call this a controller folder, and y'all have inside of the previous lessons. That said, a router isn't technically a controller. It's like really similar, which is kind of why y'all have been calling it up to this point, but not technically a controller. It has some other responsibilities like routing, which part of why it's called a router, and something called serialization, which we'll get more into inside of Unit 4. So inside of this file, we end up going ahead and having a routes folder. But if we look inside of the routes folder, what we'll see inside of here is similar to what y'all would have seen inside of a controllers folder before. We're going ahead and creating a router up top, and then we're defining routes on that router, like y'all were doing inside of your controllers folder before. Note, we use the folder routes for our router objects. Okay, let's keep going through this file. Other things inside of here. Next line, if y'all remember back to kind of the Mongoose lessons, the initial ones we were teaching, this is our normal way that we connected to a database back in the day. Same way we're going to do it here. We go ahead and say mongoose.connect. We go ahead and include our API at the end. And we have those two flags that we're going to include for now, just so Express doesn't yell at us, but in the future will be removed. So not important for us to really remember or like put these into our memory. Other bits we see. Next, they go ahead and create our application. To go ahead and create an application Express, you go ahead and just call the Express library. Just add some parentheses at the end and you'll create your application. Next thing they go ahead and do is to start registering some of the middleware functions. Now for express.json, we were just talking about this a second ago, but what express.json does is it express.json adds the incoming JSON data to our request at rec.body. So express.json is the reason we have access to our incoming data. Express.json makes sure, okay, you can get access to that data easily. You could technically get access to the data without express.json, but it would be a lot harder. So it's nice that they go ahead and include this. This is actually a functionality that back in the day wasn't included in Express, which is why we actually need middleware to use it. Back in the day, it was just a third-party package that every single person in the whole wide world used. So Express was like, hey, let's just add it in. Like everybody's already using this package, let's just add it straight in. And then we also went ahead and registered our request logger function to log any requests from our client. Okay. Now, the next line down here, I think y'all might have gone ahead and tried to do these on the same line back in the previous lesson. Like I think in the previous lesson, y'all might have done something along the lines of app.use and then just paste in this URL down here. We're going to go ahead and split it up a little bit just for readability, make sure our people can understand the intent of our code, make sure they understand what we're trying to do. So instead of going ahead and trying to make that as short as possible, I'm going to go ahead and use some nice variable names. We're going to end up calling these our user routes. And that's just going to be our user router. We went ahead and required the user routes up at the top of the file. So we're mounting them. Or if we're thinking about our other terms that we just talked about, register or use routes right down here. So we're requiring them up on line 12. using them down on line 32. And we will dive into the user routes file a little bit more in a bit. As a reminder, just at a high level, it's very similar to the books.js file y'all were writing in your controllers folder before. Now, the next thing after we mount our routes is we want to make sure that we have our error handling. As mentioned a second ago, error handling should always be at the very bottom of your file. So let's go ahead and update this to say mount the error handler. Note. Actually, I wonder if, let's see, I think we can just say warn. Let's see if VS Code is smart enough to pick that up. No, it's not. Never mind. Actually, let's try warning to see if it's smart enough to pick that up. No, it isn't. Occasionally, VS Code can be smart enough to kind of like notice, hey, my comment is a little bit more important than just a normal comment, like the to-do turning orange up here. I think there might be a word for like a warning or an error, like, hey, this could actually be problematic, but not sure what they use inside VS Code off the top of my head. Different editors use different words. But the warning I wanted to put over here was going to be warning. Make sure to mount the error handler last so it handles any errors that came before it. That's our reasoning for mounting it last. Now, the last thing we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to start up the application itself. And that was with our app.listen call. Now, the port we're going to be using inside of this lesson and for the rest of the sequence is going to be 4741. That said, it's just a port number. Realistically, could use different ones. We're going to be using 4741 for the rest just for consistency's sake. But as y'all have seen before, 3001 is another one that could work. Lots of ports could work. Well, that's just starting up the app. Okay. I think that's as much as I want to talk about the server.js for now. We will go ahead and dive into the error handler file in just a second, and we're going to dive into the user routes file in just a second. Any questions about anything we have in server.js right now? Definitely keep adding them to the thread. Not seeing anything in the thread right now, so if anybody wants to throw up a hand as well, it's a good time for it. Any last questions about server.js I can help for folks? This is going to be the format y'all are going to be seeing for the rest of the sequence, so if there are any, definitely let me know. Okay. So with that out of the way, where do we want to go next? May add a to-do list over here. We'll just add our to-do straight in here, just so we don't forget them. To do. Come back to the inside of user routes. Okay. Let's go ahead and look at our model next. We could go ahead and dive into one of these two files from server.js, but I do think before we get into them, knowing what the model is going to look like for user routes is going to be kind of useful. So I'm going to open up this models folder. Out of our models folder, we actually go ahead and provide a single model for y'all. In this case, it's going to be user.js. And that is going to be for our user routes file. We had that other file called user routes. It's going to use the user model. Now the user model inside of here is going to look pretty similar to a lot of the models we've written so far. Back in the Mongoose lessons, back over inside of the Express API CRUD lesson. For it, we're going to start off by requiring Mongoose like we usually would. And then we're just creating a schema for our user. Now, we'll dive into this hash password concept a little bit more, but for now, at a high level, we're going ahead and just including two different properties on our user. each user will need an email and a hashed password. Both are strings and required. Now we're going to talk about the hash password inside of an upcoming lesson. We'll actually have an Express API auth lesson next, which is kind of what this is hinting at. But for now, kind of the thought is, anytime you create a user, you need two different things, two different pieces of information. You're going to need their email and you need kind of their password. This hash password idea is, and it's something we'll cover more once we get into the auth lesson, but kind of at a high level, the idea behind a hash password is a website, besides like a password manager, should not be storing your passwords. It is a very hard thing to do safely and securely, which is why only like the password managing sites should be doing that. The ones who actually say, hey, this is gonna be my bottom line. If I screw it up, I'm gonna pay the penalty for it. Instead, the approach that we're gonna see out in the wild, and the approach that y'all have all used throughout any time y'all have been working with the internet, or most of the time y'all have been working with the internet, is we don't store the password, we store something based on the password. And in this case, that's going to be this hash password thing. We'll learn more about it inside of our upcoming lesson, but a little bit more for it is, okay, so we don't want to store a password because, you know, if our site gets hacked, all of our users' passwords got hacked. Horrible idea to go ahead and store those unless you're like LastPass or anybody who's actually making that your job. So instead, we're storing this hash password thing. Now, while a hash password is based off of a password, it is very hard to reverse engineer it. It is very hard to say, okay, I got this hash thing. What was the password that created it? So this is how folks will go ahead, store passwords typically. Have y'all ever noticed whenever you want to reset a password, you never get like a, if you ever go to like a forgot password button, no website is ever like, oh, you forgot your password? Oh, it's just cat236 or whatever. Like nobody ever just emails you your password back. And the reason for that is they don't have it. They have these hash passwords instead. That's kind of the reason that you've never seen them be like, oh, you forgot your password? Here's your password. They'll always shoot you a they'll always send you a link to reset your password because even the site you're working with doesn't actually know your password, which interesting thing to kind of think about. So I'm gonna leave that kind of high level for now. We will dive into it more. Let me finish this up with just a comment here. Storing a real password is incredibly risky and should not be attempted unless that is your company's purpose. So something like LastPass. I'm sure there's other ones out there. I think like Dashlane or something like that might go ahead and offer the password thing, but LastPass is just the one I remember off the top of my head. Instead, we will store a hashed password, which is based on the original password. We will learn more in the next lesson. That's going to be the idea behind this hash password. Besides that, the rest of this is going to be pretty similar to what you all have seen before. We go ahead and include our timestamps because we want those created at and updated at timestamps. And then at the very bottom, we go ahead and export our model. And we're going ahead and following the same convention that we see over inside of the Mongoose docs. In the Mongoose docs, the convention they go ahead and follow is making sure it's singular. And it actually has to be singular. You have to make it singular. But also the convention they use is to go ahead and make it uppercase as well. So we're making it singular because it has to be singular. We're making it uppercase because that's the way you'll always see it in the docs. Let me go ahead and add a comment here. Export the user model so we can use it in routes / user underscore routes.js. Okay, do we have any questions about this file before we go ahead and move on? Very quiet questions right now. So if there are questions, go ahead and raise up a yellow hand. Okay, there aren't other questions about it so far. Then let's go ahead and keep chugging along. We pop back over to server.js. We currently have 2 to-dos. Come back to the error handler and to come back to the inside of user routes. Let's go to the inside of user routes and see how that is coming along. That is going to be inside of our routes folder and our user underscore routes.js file. We go through this top to bottom. Now, we start off at the top, going ahead and requiring our Express library. Required Express library. And then we go ahead and create a router. Create a router so we can add all of our user routes to it. Should be similar to what we did over in our previous class. After that, we go ahead and require our user model. Now the user model, it's going to go ahead and be the one we just looked at a second ago. It's the one we just created. So we're requiring the user model, and let me add the reason here, to interact with our database. We'll use it to go ahead and create users. We'll use it to update them. We'll use it to go ahead and find users. We also go ahead and have a function down here to handle any 404s that occur. Y'all went ahead and wrote your middleware function to handle 404s straight in the file earlier. We went ahead and wrote this over inside of a different file. Require our middleware function that will handle any 404 errors that occur. Let me add a to-do as well. I don't think it makes sense for us to dive into it right now. There will be some differences again, but I would like us to dive into this file later. So to-do, dive into this file. Okay. The other bits we have in here, we start off by going ahead and creating a function. That's going to be our index. It's going to be our index to get all of our users. The route to get all of our users is going to be / the resource's name, and it's going to be pluralized. That's going to be the common convention you're going to see for RESTful routes. Typically go ahead and take your resource, pluralize it. So since we want to get multiple users, we'll say /users. We then see this function over here. Since it starts with rec res and next, we know it's going to be one of our middleware functions. Another term you might hear for this is you might also hear it referred to as a route handler function because it's handling this route. So there's 2 different terms that work for this one. It is a middleware function because it has rec res and next. It's a route handler function because it's responding whenever that route's hit. So 2 different terms that could work. Now the logic inside of here is if we want to find all of the users, I'll just say user.find. Find all users. And what we want to do with those users is after we find all of the users, we're going to take those users and respond with them. We're going to get the users back inside of our dot then, and we'll respond with those users. Respond with the users from the API. Now, one thing to note over here is we could also even make this even shorter. Now see how we're saying users colon users right now and how they're exactly the same. Anytime we've seen a, anytime we come across a key and a value that are exactly the same, we can always go ahead and use a little shortcut there. So we could go ahead and shorten that down to maybe just, let's go ahead and shorten it down to just users. And of the above, since the key and value are both users. So that is going to go ahead give us that's going to go ahead give us back all of our users and respond with them so we can see them. Last thing we're going to want to do is handle any errors that might have occurred. If an error occurred, call the next middleware, which is the error middleware. Just as a reminder, the next middleware after our route middleware is the error middleware. It's going to be at the end of the file. Okay, I think I might go ahead and pause just right there before we go too much further. Any questions so far? Anybody want to raise a hand? Anybody want to add anything to the thread? I think so far it's been pretty similar. I think maybe this shortcut's the biggest difference from what Weston was doing. Any questions? Wait.
So compared to what we were doing earlier, we're just kind of breaking our code up more, kind of just splitting everything apart a little bit further.
Some of it's being split up a little bit further. Definitely whenever it comes to the middleware, making sure those are inside of its own separate files. That's definitely one thing we're going ahead and doing now.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. That's going to be the index. Let's also go ahead and look over the show code. For the show code, we want to be able to go ahead and show just a single user. Go ahead and show a single of a resource. Well, that's going to be a GET request on our router. The path is going to be / that resource pluralized / :ID. That will get us a specific user. This is again going to need a middleware function. So we need rec, res, and next. They always need to be in that order. Make sure that you always have rec, res, and next in that order. Never want to put res before rec. That will just make everything break. And then we go ahead and get our ID. I believe in the previous lesson, y'all were going ahead and calling this like your user ID. Sorry, in the previous lesson, y'all were calling this the book ID because y'all were working with books. So we're going ahead and just calling it ID here. If you wanted to call it like user ID instead or something like that, that makes a lot of sense. Especially if you're working with multiple IDs, then it definitely makes a lot of sense to rename it. In our case, since we're just working with a single ID, I'm going to go ahead and just leave it as ID for now. In the future, we will work with multiple IDs, and then that distinction makes a lot of sense to make. Let me go ahead and add a comment here. Extract the ID from the request's parameters. And the request parameters are rec.params. Okay. Next thing we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and find our user by its ID, similar to how you all found your books by their IDs. Find a single user by its ID. Now, let me actually do one quick double check. Let's see exactly how y'all are doing this. Actually, it might take a second for me to get there. I think this might be a little bit different than what y'all were doing in class, but let me go ahead and walk y'all through what's happening right here, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Whenever we try to find a user by their ID, we might not always find them. Same thing with your books earlier. You know, maybe you're trying to find like a book or a user that doesn't exist. Maybe you gave it an ID that just doesn't exist. Maybe you just gave it like some dummy ID like dead beef, dead beef, dead beef. I think that's technically an ID. All like 0 through 9, A through F, technically an ID, but definitely not a useful one. If we went ahead and gave it an ID like this, almost certainly, I guess theoretically that could actually exist in the database, but almost certainly it does not exist in the database. Technically correct, but almost certainly does not exist. So we need to be able to handle, okay, what if somebody tries to get a user that doesn't exist? Well, then we want to handle that error. The way we're going to do that is going to be with this handle 404 function. I wrote a version out over in server.js earlier. We'll end up diving into our new file for that in a bit. But for now, the idea is after searching for a user, call the handle 404 function. If the user doesn't exist, it will cause a 404 not found error. Otherwise, the .then chain will continue if the user does exist. So this is going to be how we'll use this handle 404 function. We'll dive into it in a little bit. So right now, just looking at, okay, how do we use it? But after we search for something like a user or a book, we'll say .then handle 404. We'll call that handle 404 function, say, okay, need to make sure this user exists, or if it doesn't exist, cause an error. The user did exist. If we were able to find the user, we can then go ahead and respond with the user. The user existed, respond with the user. Do note you could go ahead and use that trick I was just showing off a little bit ago to just say user here instead of user : user. I'm not going to make that change for all of these, just I feel like it'd add a lot of lines of code if we went ahead and did that now. But same kind of trick applies. Could just say user like we did users earlier. We finish off this by going ahead, calling .catch next at the end. An error did occur. We want it to be handled. And we're pretty sure errors can occur here because, you know, they could give us an ID that doesn't exist. So really important to handle that. If there are questions, add them over to the thread. Otherwise, going to go ahead and keep moving along for now. The next route we have is going to be our create route. Be very similar to how you created books earlier. We go ahead and start it off by saying router.post/users. Needs its route handler function. Another name for this function right here, middleware function, because it has rec, res, and next. Since it is a create request, we do need to make sure we're using post over here, and we want to make sure that it's just a /users. Do note that we don't have an ID at the end, because whenever we're creating a user, the API gets let's be more specific. Mongoose gets to go ahead and choose the ID. So whenever you create a user or whenever you create a book, you don't include the ID because Mongoose is going to go ahead and create it. Now the logic for creating a user is whenever we create a user, we're going to end up having data on that request's body. So whenever somebody tries to create a user, we're going to go ahead and have that user's data on the request's body. Extract the data for the new user from the request's body, which is rec.body. Now, we're going to go ahead and create our user, and we'll create the user using this user data, similar to how y'all created a book a little bit ago. Create a user with the data from the client's request. Gosh. If it was successful, we're going to want to do a couple of things. We're going to want to respond with the user if it was successful. If we were able to create a user, it'd be nice to get it back, similar to how y'all did with the books. We're also going to end up using the status of 201. So respond with the user that was created. Set the status code to 201 created because we created something, because we created a user. We're using the 201 status code just to let folks know, hey, something was created successfully. Be a little bit useful whenever you're debugging things in the future. If an error occurred at some point, we'll go ahead and call .catch followed by next. And the reasoning being, maybe you weren't able to create the user. Maybe for our user, we need an email and a hash password. Maybe you accidentally forgot the email. Maybe you forgot the hash password, something like that. I'm gonna go ahead and do a quick pause. Any questions about our create so far? Let's see a question pop up over in the chat. I am going to hold on to that as well because I think it'll make more sense once we dive into our error handlers file later. Any other questions before we move on? Okay. Now, this is going to be another update that we have. Yeah, that's great because it's an update. Request. Okay, let me rephrase that. This is going to be another change that we have. Whenever it comes to our update request, instead of the previous lesson, now we're working with put a lot. We're going to end up using patch from now on out. The differences between the two aren't really that big, but patch is a little bit better whenever you're trying to update something. And let me actually add some comments here for like the reasoning of why patch is typically preferred for updating something. Let me add a note. Patch or put could be used for updating. Put is used to replace the whole object. Patch is used to apply partial updates. Now, the reason that patch is typically preferred is, okay, well, if you're sending data across the web, do you want to send the whole object or do you want to just send the changes, which is going to take up more space? Most cases, you know, maybe the object is kind of big and maybe your changes are, I just want to change a property or two. It typically is going to be, you know, less bandwidth, less data. If you just go ahead and say, okay, I just want to send the changes. What is different between this object and the new object, as opposed to going ahead and just replacing it each time. So benefits uses less data typically than put. You will still see put out there every so often. Most of the times whenever I see put nowadays are typically not to use it with objects, but a lot of the times whenever you want to replace all of the data is like whenever you're working with like a movie or like a audio file. If you're working with a movie or audio file, you don't want to just be like, okay, the first second of this movie or this first second of this audio file is different. That's just not how movies or audio files are set up on the inside internally. Instead, you legit just need to replace it verbatim, like just send all of the data to replace that image, send all that data to replace that audio file. So let me also add a note down here. Typically used to replace files like movies / audio. So good use for put. That said, you can realistically kind of use them interchangeably. It's really not going to bite you all that bad. Let's get through it. So we're using patch because we want to do a partial update. And since we're updating something, we're going to go ahead and say /users, make sure it's plural. That's the pattern we typically use with our REST, and then /ID. This is the same path we had for our show request. It's the same path we had for our delete request. Now, for our update, this is probably the most complicated one we've seen so far because it needs the ID and the data from the user. So it needs both of those. The first thing we have over here is just extracting out that ID like we did earlier. I'm actually going to go ahead and cheat and just copy and paste that comment because it's exactly the same. We're going ahead, extracting the ID from the request parameter. Next thing we do is we go ahead and extract the data for the update. Const user data equals rec.body.user. We actually have already done this as well. We did this step up over in create. I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste its comment again. Extract the data for the new user. Let me change this to be for the updated user. Yeah, that works. Extract the data for the updated user from the request's body. And then we actually get to some other lines we've seen before. The next two lines, the user.find by ID and the then handle 404, we actually saw that already up in show. We needed to go ahead and find the user by its ID. And then if we couldn't find it, handle that 404. Exactly the same as these two lines up here. I'll mention down here, same as show. And same as show. There. Now, at this point, we want to go ahead and update our user. So we'll go ahead and use our update one function. We ended up seeing this function back inside of our Mongoose relationships lesson. So if we found our user, update them with the user data. Maybe we could say with the client's user data, just so we're reminded of where that came from rec.body, from the client's request. Now for updating, there's a lot of ways you could respond to it. We're going to go ahead and just show off how to respond with a 204, just not send anything back. But multiple different ways that you could respond. Respond with a successful method with our successful response. Use 204 no content since we are not sending back any data. And then, as always, if an error occurred at any point, we'll call the next middleware to go on to the next function. Let's pause for questions again. Any questions about this update function? Biggest differences being we're going ahead and using patch this time around. Also for the response, just keeping it simple, not going to respond with any data. If they want that data, they can make another GET request for it. Okay, if there aren't other questions there, let's also talk about our destroy function. Now, our destroy route is a better way to say that. For our destroy route, we're going ahead and think router.delete. Since we want to go ahead and get rid of a user, we use the delete HTTP method. We're going to need to include our ID inside of our path, just like we did with show and just like we did with update, because we need to know, okay, which user do you want to delete? And we're going to go ahead and give it a middleware function as rec res and next. Now for delete, starts off by extracting that ID again. We've already seen how that was done over inside of update and show, so I'm not going to talk about that too much. Actually, let me go ahead and just say that the first 3 lines of code are the same as show. First 3 lines over here where we're going ahead and getting the ID, finding by the ID, handling that 404, all 3 exactly the same as show. So that's staying the same. The thing that's going to go ahead and change is we're going to end up using our delete one function next. If we were able to find our user, delete them. And then if we were able to delete them successfully, we're going to respond with a successful response again. We'll use 204 no content since we're not sending back any data. Sending back a 204 no content is probably the most common way you'll ever see like an update. Sorry, not an update. Is probably one of the most common ways you'll ever see like a destroy request written. Because even if you have like the user you just deleted around, it'd be kind of weird to send that back. It's like, okay, you just deleted this resource. It doesn't exist in the database anymore. Sending it back to them just seems like it could cause more problems than it's probably worth. It's like, okay, you actually try to get rid of it. Let's not send you that back. Just pretend like, okay, it's gone forever. And it will be after this has succeeded. For the delete, finishes off by saying .catch and next. An error occurs, make sure that error handle. If an error occurs, make sure the error middleware is called. Make sure it is handled there. And that is going to go ahead and bring us to the end of user routes. The only other thing it does is export the router at the end so that we can use it over in server.js. As a reminder, we did go ahead and require it up on line 13 of server.js. And then we went ahead and used it down here on line 33. Now, any last questions about the user routes file so far? We will still be diving into this file up here, the custom errors file. So we will dive into that later, but any questions about the user routes file we're currently in? Okay. Let's go ahead. I think we're at a good spot for another break. We'll go ahead and come back at 9:13. Whenever we come back, we'll keep chugging along on this lesson, finishing up this review. So back at 9:13. Okay, everybody, let's go ahead and come back together. While everybody's coming back together, I'll let y'all know amazing thing I just learned about life. And that is, you should just wear a soft shell jacket 24/7 if you're sloppy. Just spilled water on myself. You don't even notice it. Waterproof, just wipes completely off. Beautiful. Now, if you are able to eat normally without just spilling on yourself every 5 seconds, less useful. But... Okay, let's get back into it. At this point, we've gone through a lot of the files. As far as our to-dos are concerned, still wanted to dive into this handle 404 file at some point. It was something I saw a little bit with Weston earlier, but gone ahead and made some modifications to it. The other thing we're going to be doing is diving into the error handler file, which, as you might guess, these two files are going to be very closely interrelated with each other, okay, handling the errors and causing a 404 to occur. I think we're going to go ahead and dive into the handle 404 file first. So let's go ahead and try that. As I say, handle 404 file. Whenever we go ahead and import this function, we typically call it handle 404. That's how y'all will see it for the rest of the sequence, and inside of our template we'll provide you at the end. Because while we're making sure y'all know how to build all this out from scratch, you're still getting a template at the end, just like the browser template, so that whenever you work on your projects, you don't have to waste all this time on auth. It would take a lot of time to write it yourselves. But let's go ahead and dive into this custom errors file, look at this handle 404 function. Looks like we might have a question before I head off. Matthew.
Yeah. What's going on with that file path where it's like // then //
So I should probably clarify because I groaned the second I saw that as well. Something you can technically do. What's going on here is they're saying start from the current folder, which where are we for user routes? User routes is going to be the routes folder. Then go up a folder, so 2 dots. So you're in the routes folder, you're going up a folder. If we go up a folder from the routes folder, we're just inside of our folder that we went ahead and cloned down. So the Express API relationships folder. Then we're going to dive into the lib folder. There's lib. And dive into the custom errors file. Now, anytime y'all see me write paths, you don't typically see, if I need to go up a folder, y'all don't ever see me do the // to start it off with, because if you're going up a folder, you don't really need to say, start from the current folder, go up a folder. You can just start it with go up a folder. So this could also have been written as // Either is perfectly fine. I definitely have a preference for this one, but it's just a preference.
Cool, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm gonna get and just delete that just so it's less confusing if we have it around. Okay, so let's dive into the custom errors file. If we look inside the lib folder, we have custom errors.js. And this is going to be kind of similar to what y'all were doing earlier, but with some changes. Inside of your previous lesson, y'all looked at, okay, how you could cause an error to occur if you learned how you could go ahead and cause an error to occur for a 404. We want to be a little bit more specific about it. We actually wanted to go ahead and create a custom error. So if a 404 occurs, we get a little bit more information about it. Now, we're going to notice some things up here that we haven't really talked about. So I'm going to be covering lines 1 through 7 at a high level. Now, the reason I'm doing that is, well, let me pull up the docs. If they haven't changed too much, we can actually see the reasoning pretty well. We're going to go ahead and Google custom errors MDN and see if it shows up. Probably this first link. I have some examples down here for handling errors. The first one was to handle like a generic error, which is what y'all saw with Weston a bit ago. If y'all just want to throw a generic error, just say throw new error, you can do that for like any generic error. But you could also go ahead and have more specific errors. They talk about handling it right here, but let's see if we can find them throwing a specific error. There we go. They go ahead and show off how we could create a specific error. And then they show the syntax for it down here. Now, I'm going to be hand waving at lines 1 through 7 down here because realistically, this class syntax we're looking at, we're going to do a deep dive on it inside of Unit 3 once we come to React. With React, back in the day, the only way that you could really get access to data that would change over time was using these class components. So they're a really big part of React still. So we'll end up seeing them once we get to React. For now, kind of use it at a high level. The reason we're going ahead and writing it in this format is, well, for today, it's because the docs tell us to use that format, something very similar. Now, the error we're making over here, let's go through it. Create a custom error called document not found error. We will throw this error. If you're less familiar with the throw this error kind of terminology, because it's a little bit new, we can go ahead and think of that as cause this error to occur or something like that. Anytime we cannot find a document, a 404. So now inside of here, the way it starts off is by saying class document not found error extends error. We're just copying that syntax verbatim. This extends word over here. We haven't really seen it before, but what it means is a document not found error is a error, or that's how we can think about it for now. Extends means is a. So you can even leave that note here for us. Extends means is a. So document not found error is going to be an error. Now, some things that they want us to do, they want us to go ahead and call super. We're going to go ahead and do that. I'll do a little bit different than what they're doing, but similar idea. And then they go ahead and show off that we could set a couple of properties that are going to be used for this error. Things like the name of the error. In their example, they said that, okay, if you're going to go ahead and create an error called custom error, setting the name to custom error, the same as the name you put up here, makes a lot of sense. So we use the same name as up here. Just make sure that the name of the error we created is the same as this property in here. Set the name of our error. And then we can also go ahead and give a message for our error. This message will be shown whenever our error occurs. Set the message that is shown whenever our error occurs. Let me go ahead and see. I think if we scroll up a little bit more, we can see what this is similar to that you all were working with a second ago. Earlier, whenever you were throwing errors, you were just passing the message straight through as a string. If you already know what the error message is going to be, like we do here for the document not found error, we can just say this.message and set it. We know that we're always going to want to use the same message, so we can just set it here. This is why we don't have to pass it through. Now, that's how we can go ahead and define this error. Define it perfectly fine. So this error exists, we can use it in the future. Now, the way we're going to use it is we have this handle 404 middleware function. We actually saw how to use the handle 404 function already. We got to see that, okay, anytime we were doing a show, an update, or a destroy, anytime we had to go ahead and find a specific resource, we would find it by its ID first. We'd then say .then handle 404. Realistically, feel free to leave like your knowledge right there. That's perfectly fine. You can go ahead and just understand how to use this. That would get you perfectly fine with this program. But we'll also go ahead and talk about kind of what's happening behind the scenes a little bit more. How the handle 404 function is written. The way this handle 404 function is going to be written, it's going to be a little bit different than what y'all did with Weston, is we're first going to go ahead and see if the document is null. If you do a find by ID or a find one and you aren't able to find the document you're looking for, it will be null. I'll make a note down here. If the document doesn't exist, let me actually modify this a little bit. The document doesn't exist. That, actually, let me see how I could phrase this. If the document is null, that means it doesn't exist. So if the document that's passed to handle 404 is null, it means it doesn't exist. So throw our error. So we're going to check if the document's null, then we want to throw our document not found error. Cause our document not found error to occur. This is similar to, and let's go ahead and have a line of what we all would have done with like Weston in the previous lesson. So I would have said something like new error. And then you could have just copied and pasted whatever your error message was. So I'll just copy and paste the error message from up above. New error ID does not match any document in the database. So it's similar to that, but a little bit better because it's going to be more reusable. And that's going to be the main benefit right now. So if our document's null, we'll throw our new document not found error, make that error occur. I mentioned that this is going to be similar to just saying a new error with some strings. So let me actually show you that to y'all over in Node. If I pop over to Node right now, I can put in this document not found error. Now, if I want to go ahead and cause this error to occur like y'all have been doing previously, actually, let's go ahead and, since I just copied and pasted, let's just use the document not found error. If I want to use this document not found error, I could go ahead and just copy and paste line 22. I paste this in here and hit enter. It's going to cause that error to occur. And it goes ahead, gives me a nice little error message. Uncut. Now it's telling me the name of the error message. That's coming from this name property over here. So being a little bit more descriptive, giving us a little bit more information about this error message, which can be nice. And going ahead and including our message afterwards. And just to show you all how similar this is to just going ahead and using a normal error. If I went ahead and just used a normal error, ran it, looks pretty darn similar. The biggest difference over here is going to be, okay, well, instead of getting a uncaught document not found error, it's just going ahead telling us it's a generic error. So you get less information about it. Okay. And at the bottom of the file, we'll export this handle 404 function. Make a note down here. Export the handle 404 function so we can use it. And it's going to be in our routes files. So routes/user routes for now. Okay, that is going to be our custom errors file. Let me go ahead and I think it'd be a good idea to pop open the user routes again. Pin that over to the side. I'm going to stop for questions. Do let me know if there are questions. This is going to probably look a little bit different than what y'all were working with Weston. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the thread right now in case anything's popped up.
That's pretty much clear right now.
Okay. Anything that you think is worth going over? Anything that you think would be common error?
I'm sorry, I didn't realize I wasn't on camera. I was giving you a thumbs up that whole time. No, we good.
Oh, sweet. Okay, then let's go ahead and keep moving along. If any of this went over any of your heads, feel free to remember that, hey, don't really have to worry about too much of the internals as long as at the end of the day, you can go ahead and require the handle 404 function. And after doing a find by ID, say dot then handle 404. As long as you can do those 2 lines, it'll be good for actually using it. So nice to know how all this error handling is working, but less important for actually using it. Okay, with that said, I think we might be ready for our last file. Now, the last file is probably going to be the trickiest one. It is going to be our error handler, and might look a little similar to what y'all did with Weston, but as you've noticed, this lesson is similar, but then some. Similar, but then some extra bits here and there. Let's go ahead and open up that last file. Last to do, actually, that's the error handler. Actually, yeah, that is actually what we need to do. So the last to do we had was to go back to this error handler. Let's do that. The error handler is going to be included inside of the lib folder and inside of error underscore handler itself. So if we go over to the lib folder and into the error underscore handler file, we're going to see the error handler. And that looks good. I'm going to go ahead and move all the code to one side of the screen so we can pull up our docs. So for this error handler we have over here, it's going to have, actually, before I start talking too much, yeah, just wanted this one line to look a little bit better. Okay, so inside of this file, we have our error handler for this application. It's also going to be the error handler that we'll be building on for the auth lesson. Right now, it's handling a couple of different errors that y'all saw with Weston in a slightly different format. Before I go too far into this, I want to actually pull up our error handling middleware documentation. If we go ahead and Google Express, so let's Google Express.js. And let me actually show you all just how to get there from the normal Express documentation. We could Google extra stuff and get there faster, but let's just get straight to Express.js, see how to navigate their site a little bit. We go to the first link for Express.js. We'll have some links up here at the top. They have some API references, which goes into like really nitty gritty details for like any of the objects they have. The good thing about Express is it's pretty minimal. So there's like 5 to 6 objects in total, like not that many objects, but gives you nitty gritty details about all of them. And then they have these guides over here, which we can use ourselves whenever we're implementing bits. Now, we don't want to go ahead and look at how to just write normal middleware. Instead, let's go ahead and look at the error handling down here. I think that's going to jump into the error handling middleware itself. If we look at the error handling middleware, let's see if they show us the custom error handling middleware down here. Default error handler. There we go. I have a section down here talking about writing error handlers. If we want to go ahead and write our own custom error handler with a lot of logic to it, well, it's going to go ahead and work very similar to other middleware functions. As I mentioned earlier, all of our middleware functions have rec, res, and next, something we're always used to. And as y'all saw earlier with Weston, for error handling middleware, it'll also have another parameter to start it off with. That's going to be the error itself, in this case, ERR. So if we go ahead and look at our code, we're going to start off kind of similar to this. I'm going to start off with the same parameters for now. We want our error, rec, res, and next. And then we can go ahead, jump into our logic. Now for our error handler, a couple of things we're going to do. One, we're going to go ahead and just log this data out. Looks like they're also using this .to time string just to go ahead and format it a little bit. I think we can see how those look different. We just did a new date. It looked like that. I do a new date.to time string, it's a little bit more information. Ooh, it knows what time zone I'm in. That's nice of it. So over here, first line, we just want to log the time. Log the time. And the to time string method, really just going ahead, being nice, telling you what your time zone is. What your time zone is. That's kind of neat. Include the time zone. You could use either way, like we have shown off different ways to show the date inside of the request logger and over here. Either of those two approaches would work. Just showing off some different ways. After we log the time, we're going to go ahead and log out the error. An error has occurred. Let's make sure to log it. So making sure that folks are aware of it. The next thing that they go ahead and do is actually, before we even get, let's rephrase that. Before we talk about this line, at the end of the day for our error handler, the very end of the day, last thing we're going to want to do is we want to go ahead and respond to this error. And we want to go ahead and send back a status code and send back our error message. At the end of the day, we want to go ahead and say, okay, what's the status code? What went wrong? And send back the message for it. Let me add a comment here. Respond with the error's status code and message. So this is going to be what we'll be working up to. It's what we want to do at the end of the day. Now, with that in mind, we need to figure out what the status code should be. We've seen a couple of different status codes already. We've seen 500 is going to go ahead and be an internal server error. We messed up the server, something went wrong there. We've seen 404, meaning, hey, the document or page we're looking for doesn't exist. We've also maybe seen 422. If not, we'll see that later. Actually, if we haven't seen 422, we'll see it in 2 seconds as it's right there. So lots of different error messages, lots of different error status codes we might send back. Now we want to figure out what status code we should send back. So we create a variable for it. Now for this variable, we're going to go ahead and give it a default value just to say, okay, if it isn't in any of these other status codes, well, it'll be the default value. The default status code we're going to use is a 500. We're going to say that, hey, if we weren't able to detect that this was some other kind of error, we'll just say it's my bad. It's an internal server error. I messed up the server. Just say 500 internal server error. We need to determine the status code of the error. Unless we can determine the status code should be something else, we will default to a 500 internal server error to let the client know we have a bug in our server. That's kind of the idea there. 500 means, okay, I've broken my server. Yeah. Now, after we've got that default, we go ahead and try to figure out, okay, have we seen this error before? Now, on line 13, we have our error object up here, and we want to take its name property and see if it's a document not found error. That was our special property we added over in our document not found error. We said this .name is going to be document not found error. That's what we're checking for on line 13. If it is our custom error, or custom document not found error, we'll set the status code to 404. Set the status code to 404. Not found. We aren't able to go ahead and find the resource and give back a not found error. Now, there are two other errors that we'll end up seeing. And those are going to be a cast error or a validation error. Now, a validation error means a mongoose validation failed. If y'all remember back in the day, we saw a handful of mongoose validators together. We saw there was like a required validator, we saw a min validator, we saw a max validator, saw like an enum, max length, min length. Lots of different ways we could say, okay, we want our data to look in a specific format. So let's go ahead and add a note here. A validation error means that mongoose failed a validation when creating / updating a document. Example, missing a required field or failing a min or max validation, something like that. The other error we're going to see is something called a cast error. And this is going to occur with IDs every so often. If you try to go ahead and give something that isn't an ID, occasionally you'll run into a cast error. Mongo is going to go ahead and take whatever you gave it. It's going to, like if you have find by ID and give it something that isn't an ID, it's going to treat it like it's an ID. Occasionally, whenever it's treating something like an ID and you gave it something that was an ID, it doesn't know what to do with it. So a cast error would occur. So as I mentioned over here, that's going to occur if we have an invalid MongoDB ID format. If either of these two errors occur, we want to do something called an unprocessable entity. We want to go ahead and set status code to 422. Let me go ahead and get the docs open for this while we're at it. So let's say MDN 422. Oh, that's fast. 422 used for unprocessable entity. It indicates that the server understands the content type. So maybe you sent it JSON and it's like, okay, I understand that you gave me JSON. So it understands the content type of the request entity and the syntax of the request entity is correct. So maybe it even notices that you gave it JSON and it's good JSON, but it was unable to process the contained instructions. So you gave it data that's formatted correctly, but it doesn't know what the heck to do with it. This could occur like, say you're creating a user and you forgot to give it an email. Well, even if you gave it the right looking data, if it doesn't have the email property on it, it's going to be unprocessable. The server doesn't know how to create a user without an email. So let's add a note here describing that error. So if it's a cast error or a validation error, set the status code to 422 unprocessable entity. And let's go ahead and rephrase that, set the status code and message to 422 unprocessable entity. Okay. What last questions do we have about our error handler file? We will get to go ahead and demo this, but at this point, I'm going to hold off the demo until Saturday class because we are getting a little close to the buzzer. So we'll see the error handling again on Saturday once we're going ahead and working on that. Any last questions about what we have inside of this file? If anything in here is confusing, kind of same advice as before, don't get like too worried about what's inside of this error handler file itself. At the end of the day, using it, knowing that, okay, you have to be able to require the error handler up at the top, and knowing that at the very bottom, you need to go ahead and use it or register or mount it. It's the most important thing. Knowing how to use it is more important than really the internals. Wait.
For our next project, are we going to be doing like custom error handling?
So for your next project, So basically the idea with this current lesson and the auth lesson that comes after it is we're going to finish building out this template y'all are going to be using for your project. So whenever your project comes along, you will not be writing out the error handling code. And it's just a waste of your time to like, if we went ahead and said, okay, for your projects, spend the first 3 days of it going ahead and writing error handling code, and spend the last day or two of it writing your actual application, that'd be miserable. I actually had a capstone where I actually got stuck doing pretty much that. I don't want y'all to do that. It's miserable. I'd rather y'all understand the auth code, and then we'll go ahead and make sure it's easy for y'all to get started like we did with the browser template. Okay. With that said, if there are other questions, maybe go ahead and start raising up your hands. I'm going to go ahead and do our announces right now. Our announces for tonight. And let me go ahead and actually get that over into our homework thread. Actually, is that already been sent out? One second, let me double check something.
Since we didn't get far enough today, I think we should put off part 2 till Saturday, because yesterday I introduced the homework and we weren't quite ready to like work on it. So tonight's homework would be finish part 1 of the homework since we finished the lab and everything, and then part 2 will be on Saturday night.
Okay, let me just add a little reminder note. I'm not going to add it to the thread since we already have the homework there, but let me add a reminder note at here. Tonight's homework is to continue working on part 1 of the DIY API Mongoose-Express. And Weston, would you mind going ahead and updating the calendar, just moving that event over to Saturday so he makes sure to send out part 2 then? Okay, with that said, we are now at time for our class. So go ahead, keep working on that part 1 of the homework if you're still working on it. With that said, we're going to go ahead and wind it down for tonight, and we'll see y'all on Saturday. If y'all have questions, go ahead, start raising up those hands. Sharon, what's on your mind?
Could you like push out what we've done today?
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure if I've actually written any code per se, but I'll go ahead and get those comments out there for y'all.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Let me go ahead and do that just right now. It shouldn't take too long. Get remote.
And you guys have a good night.
You too. There are other questions, go ahead and raise up your hand. Weston can definitely go ahead and start on those while I finish off slacking out the code.